So, you just managed to get your character freshly to level 70 today. Or maybe you came back to a character you haven't touched in a while. Whether you're a new or returning player, or just someone who leveled a new character recently, your goal now is to catch up with everyone on gear, so you can finally get invited to those new raids, do arena, get ready for Wrath, or anything really. Today, I got you covered. With Phase 4 freshly released, it's now easier than ever to catch up with everyone on gear. So in this video, we're gonna look at the fastest way to make your character stronger, from freshly hitting level 70 to getting into Black Temple and Mount Hyjal and topping the meters. We're gonna go from easiest to hardest avenues of gearing your character, so you're caught up in no time. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, let's start from the beginning. You just hit level 70 and you want to get some very basic gear to at least start doing some damage. Well, you're in luck, because while you were leveling and doing quests, you probably managed to reach friendly or honored with many different factions. And that's gonna be your first easy source of gear. Look at your reputation list and check what you're honored or maybe even revered with. And head to those factions quartermasters. There's some decent gear to grab from here. But most importantly, what you're after is the PvP set. In Phase 2, we got what's called the PvP faction gear. It's those pieces. For example, for hunters here, it's called Stalker's Chain Battle Gear, but it has a different name for every class. You only need honor to buy this set, and you can grab one piece from each one of the 5 different factions. This set is nothing crazy, but it's a solid starter set. Also, make sure to look around too for other pieces on the quartermasters. Depending on your reputation standing, you can grab boots, bracers, rings, or even weapons. So yeah, reputation gear is your first step. Next up, your next step is to start looking for some decent quest gear. There's quests all over Outland that give some very solid pre-raid bis items. For example, one that you might have skipped takes place in Hellfire Peninsula, and it has you kill Erasius the Cruel. It's a group quest, but you can probably solo it by now, and it will reward you with a very solid trinket. Trinkets are quite rare, especially early on, and this one is an easy one to get. But that was just one example. There's quests with solid gear like this all over Outland. My advice for you to find them is to go on Wowhead and look for your class's pre-raid best in slot guide. Then look at every slot and see if there isn't anything that comes from a quest. Most of those quests will require you to be in a group, but people do those around the clock in TBC, especially on larger servers, so do those first. At this stage, we're still on the pre-raid best in slot gear level. If this isn't your first character and you have a lot of gold to spare, you could just skip this step and start buying crafted or BoE gear right away. But I'll assume you don't have a ton of gold to spare here, so your next step would be to get started on doing a few normal dungeons. Specifically, what I suggest you start with is doing the Caverns of Time dungeons, and most importantly, doing their quest line, which has you clear Durnhold and Black Morass once. This will get you to Honored with Keepers of Time right away. So that's back to tip number 1, to buy reputation gear and PvP faction gear from that faction now. And also, because you want to reach Honored with this faction anyways to unlock heroic versions of those dungeons, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, do the Caverns of Time normal dungeons. Then maybe do a couple runs of Mechanar or Botanica, for the same reason, to reach Honored with the Shatar faction this time. And that should be it, you're ready to move on. By the way, remember your pre-raid best in slot list I told you about? You should keep an eye on it at all times from here. This will help you decide which dungeon to do next. If there's 3 or 4 pieces of loot that you need in a specific dungeon, you should probably prioritize doing that dungeon first, and that applies for the next step too. The next step is getting into heroic dungeons. So this is the first catch-up mechanic added with Phase 4 that we're gonna talk about. It used to be that you needed to be revered with a faction to access the heroic dungeon associated with that faction. Revered was quite long and tedious to reach, but now it's been lowered to honored. If you made it to level 70, you should be honored with most of the 5 big factions in TBC already. So go and buy any heroic key that you have unlocked and start doing those heroic dungeons. You can do each dungeon once every day on heroic. I wouldn't do all of them every day though, that's way too much work and hassle. Instead, what I suggest you do is first do the heroic daily dungeon. The Heroic Daily is this quest that you can grab from here near the tavern in Shatrat, and that's gonna ask you to kill the last boss of a random dungeon every day, and that will reward you with 3 badges of justice, which we'll talk about more in a minute. That dungeon will be on high demand that day, so you'll have way more luck getting into that than other ones, so start with that first. Then of course, as I said earlier, look at your pre-BIS list and look what you're after that drops from heroic dungeons. Remember that any normal loot drops in both heroic and normal, by the way. So if you have some normal gear to grab from a normal dungeon, you're better off grabbing it from the heroic version of that dungeon. Also, remember to always loot the bosses yourself after you kill them. Each one drops 1 badge of justice on heroic. Again, more on those later. I know I said I would assume you don't have any gold, but at this stage, you should have enough gold to buy some very basic BoE gear. There's a lot of bind on equip blue pieces of gear that are pre-raid BIS for many classes. For example, for hunters, there's the Valanos longbow. Well, it's not pre-raid BIS per se, but it's up there on the list. And since the game has been out for a long time, this bow is dirt cheap. But yeah, there's a lot of quite solid BoEs like that go for very cheap on the auction house. Again, look at your pre-BIS list and buy those wherever you see them. Moving on, I think by now you're ready to step into raids. Very basic raids, that is. I don't think you're ready for Zul'Aman yet. Although, if your guild or friends are willing to invite you, go for it. But Karazhan, Grohl, or Magtheridon should be very accessible to you at this stage of the game. I would start with Kara, because it's a long raid with a lot of bosses and a lot of loot to grab. And it's also 10 men only and very easy. Most pug raids are soft reserve nowadays, by the way, which means that you have to quote soft reserve 1 or 2 pieces of loot at the start of the raid. And once that drops, only people who soft reserved it get to roll on it. If no one soft reserved a specific item, everyone gets to roll on it, depending on your loot rules, of course. So yeah, at this stage, have a look at your BIS list from phase 1 or phase 2 before stepping in a soft reserve raid to know what you should soft reserve in advance. I advise going for something that you know isn't gonna be too contested. Keyword too contested. Because if you know something will not be contested at all, you're better off not wasting your soft reserve on it. Again, remember to loot every boss for your badge of justice. Since phase 4, every raid boss drops badges now, so take advantage of it. I teased badges of justice enough now. Let's talk about them, because at this stage of the game, you should have quite a few of them to spare. Badges, as you know already, drop from every boss in heroic dungeons and in raids up to and including SSC and Tempest Keep. Black Temple and Hyjal don't drop them yet. What you can do with those is buy some very solid gear. In phase 4, Blizzard added newer and better gear to the badge of justice vendor. Most of this is on par with current content raids, if not even better in some cases. So yeah, as soon as you have enough badges to spare, I would start spending it on the badge vendor. Now, some pieces are definitely higher prio than others, of course. To know which ones you should go for first, look at your current phase 4 best in slot list and see what badge gear is on there. Going for any of that, especially if it's up there in the list, should be an easy choice that you'll not be replacing for a long time. So yeah, remember to do your heroic daily, heroic dungeons in general, clear your Karazhans every week, and you'll have a solid amount of badges in no time. By now, you should be more than ready to step into Zul'Aman. As I said, if you can manage to squeeze into one earlier, go for it, because ZA is an insane raid for catching up on gear. Bosses here drop gear that's best in slot currently for many classes. Speaking for myself here, as a hunter, there's a whopping 4 best in slot pieces of gear to get from here. That's insane for an easy 10-man raid that anyone can clear. Also, this raid is on a 3-day lockout, unlike all the other raids in the game that are on a 7-day lockout. So not only do you get some insane gear from here, not only does it drop 13 badges of justice per run, not only is it an easy 10-man raid, but you also get to do this once every 3 days. Now, there is one issue with Zul'Aman, unfortunately, and it's the fact that it's quite toxic. The reason for this is because when you start the raid, there's a timer, and if you manage to kill the first 4 bosses before the end of that timer, you get a mount. A lot of people are after that mount. Unfortunately, to do the raid fast enough to get that, you'll have to have a solid group. So what you'll see happening very often is people will join, see midway through that your group isn't gonna make the timer, and leave midway through. This is quite rare though, because people do get saved at the end of the day, and they prefer to at least clear the raid instead of just leaving. But I've still seen it happen quite a lot of times, and when you have a healer or tank leaving midway through, it's hard to convince someone to join for half a ZA run. But that's a risk to take, unfortunately. Anyways, moving on. So you did your normal dungeons, you did your heroic dungeons, you cleared your Kara, your ZAs, and maybe even your SSCs and TKs. What should you focus on next? Well, now it's time to start spending some gold. Some big gold. Crafted gear is some of the strongest gear you can get. Sometimes it's best in slot for a lot of classes, and you'll probably see that on your best in slot gear list, so get working on it. Here's one relevant example. As a Fury Warrior, you have Dragon Strike, a very solid mace. Since Phase 4, you can now equip 2 of them. Outside of having Warglaives or some Season 3 arena gear, having 2 Dragon Strikes as a Fury Warrior is going to be your best combination of weapons. That's just an example with warriors though, but a lot of classes have some very solid crafted gear like that in TBC. Unfortunately, you'll have to spend a lot of gold on it, or farm for it quite a lot. Finally, all that's left for you to do is to step into current raids, Black Temple and Hyjal. For this, you'll probably have to get yourself a guild, or farm enough gear to be accepted into good pugs. Either way, you're now all caught up with everyone else. Congratulations. Here's some honorable mentions. World bosses. World bosses have had a couple changes in Phase 4. They now drop Badges of Justice, and they also drop BoE gear. Gear that you could find on the auction house. Now, that gear is outdated by now for many classes, but you should still have a look at it and see if you can't grab it for cheap. When it comes to doing world bosses yourself, unless you're in a guild that's dominating world bosses on your server, it's unlikely that you'll even see one spawning, let alone get to kill it. World bosses are some of the most exclusive pieces of content in Classic and TBC, and they're usually camped 24/7 on most servers. PvP. I know PvP isn't everyone's cup of tea, but you can get some quite solid pieces of gear for just doing some basic BGs and getting a bit of honor. Go to your capital city, go into your PvP hall, and look at this vendor. You'll see from here that you can get some solid neck and ring pieces for a couple tens of thousands of honor. If you're someone that likes PvP, doing some BGs can be an easy way to get some solid pieces. Also, since Phase 3, you can now exchange Tier 4 and Tier 5 tokens that drop from raid bosses for the equivalent PvP set. The Season 1 set in exchange for the Tier 4 tokens, and the Season 2 set in exchange for the Tier 5 tokens. A nice and easy way to get some solid PvP gear quite fast without setting foot in arena. And that's pretty much it. I wanted to go over the avenues for gearing your character, from easiest to hardest. I hope I covered everything, but I probably forgot some stuff here and there. So if you guys have some tips to make it easier for everyone, please drop them in the comments to help your fellow new or returning players or altaholics. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to give it a like and subscribe to the Classic WoW Curios channel for more content like this. My name is Numidia, and I will see you guys in the next one very soon. Bye for now.